Hey, everybody. Welcome to The Back Room. I'm Andy Ostroy.
You know, in this country, they leak all over the place, even on the Supreme Court. By the way, you have to find the leaker of the Supreme Court. You have to find the leaker. You know how you find the leaker? They'll say, oh, this is treasonous, what I said. So they can't find the leaker. He leaked all about Roe v. Wade. Look, this person leaked from the Supreme Court. Never happened. You know how you find? But they don't want to mention this because they think it's so terrible. You take the writer, because you're never going to find it. They're going through phone records. It's been a long time. You take the writer and or the publisher of the paper, a certain paper, and you say, who is the leaker? National Security. And they say, we're not going to tell you. They say, it's okay, you're going to jail. And when this person realizes that he is going to be the bride of another prisoner very shortly, he will say, I'd very much like to tell you exactly who that leaker is. It was Bill Jones. I swear he's a leaker. And we got him. But they don't want to do that.
For those of you who are not sure what you just listened to, I'm going to clarify it for you. The former president of the United States is advocating that male and female journalists, who he's offended by or feeling insecure by because they're doing their job and reporting the truth, that these journalists should be sent to prison where they will be raped, and that will get them to reveal their confidential sources. The depth of his sociopathy and cruelty and sickness is absolutely stunning. And there's a couple of things that to me are even more disturbing than that. One is the people in the audience who are like, yeah, rape, let's rape another human being. Okay. And laughing about it. And the fact that the entire Republican Party is basically still worshiping this monster and wants him to be president again. The guy who says journalists who should be raped because we want to know who's leaking and who the sources are, he should be president again. So just take that into the voting booth with you on November 8th, because if you're a little confused as to who should control one or more houses of Congress, hopefully that tips it to Democrats, because this is a party full of very disturbed people. By the way, we are going to introduce a new segment on this podcast called How's My Trump Impression Doing? Because as Maddie and Jen know, one of my life's goals and one of the most frustrating things in my life is that I somehow, as someone who has done impressions reasonably amateurishly well my whole life, I just cannot. And I see everybody doing Trump, and I can't do him. And so I'm going to work on it, you nasty. Maybe I'll just keep watching Matt Friend videos and Alec Baldwin and all these guys who are doing him really well. So we're going to keep you updated. I have some homework. I have to go home and study Trump, and I'll do that. Trump was in the news this week. If we want to spend a few minutes talking about shit that happened this week, an appeals court rejected his request to stop the release of his tax returns to the House Ways and Means Committee, which is due next week. So those returns, which he's been trying for probably 7 years now not to disclose, are going to eventually be handed to Congress, and his cultists are going to know what a financial fraud he is. Liz Cheney in the news, back in the news, our favorite Republican. Overnight, she's announced that she will not just endorse, but campaign with Michigan Congresswoman Alyssa Slotkin from the 7th District. This is a toss-up district. It's a closely watched bellwether right now. And this could really tip it to Democrats who desperately need to hang on to every seat they can. And we're still hoping to have Liz on the pod. Our favorite stand-up comic, Herschel Walker, back in the news. Another woman came forward and said she, too, was urged to get an abortion by Mr. We should outlaw abortion, even in cases of rape, incest, and the health of the mother. So we'll follow that story closely in the next 11 days, especially as his polling has dropped after his amazing performance in his IM work with many police officers debate. The economy growing. We ended 2 quarters of downward retraction, and now we have 2.6% growth, which was 0.3% more than expected. So people, if you just look at the economy, where we are, jobs, unemployment, GDP, wages, stock market, gas prices coming down, inflation has plateaued and is reversing. The economy is strong, and that's because of Biden and Democrats. So even if you want to just vote on that and not the absolute lunacy of Trump and the Republicans and Trumpism, there's plenty of reason to go into that booth on the 8th and vote Democrat. Keep Democrats in power. Keep Joe Biden and the Democrats in power. 11 days from now, I know this sounds cliche, it is the most important election of our lifetime. It will be the beginning of the end of democracy, but in a more immediate sense, it will just be obstruction like we've never seen before. Whatever we've gotten out of the Biden administration in the last 2 years, nothing's going to happen in the next 2 years, except ridiculous partisan bullshit like impeaching Biden, impeaching Merrick Garland, impeaching other Democrats, many of whom we in the cabinet that most people haven't even heard of. They're just going to be on a rampage of obstruction and political terror. So get out there and vote, because it is really the most important election we've seen. Maddie, I know you wanted to talk about Elon Musk taking over Twitter today. I'm of the camp of let's give him the benefit of the doubt, and you are?
Not quite. Well, I think he's a national security threat. He's beholden to China. We see this when he talks about Taiwan and toes the Chinese party line. He also talks about Ukraine from Putin's standpoint. And he calls himself a free speech absolutist, which I don't really know how that's going to work with advertisers on Twitter, because if you remove the guardrails to moderation, you're not going to have advertisers, because you're just going to have a shit show, and no one wants to advertise on a shit show. And I just don't see, unless the advertisers keep them in line, I don't know what happens with Twitter.
Mm-hmm. Well, last night he fired the CEO, the COO, the COO, I believe, was the person who permanently banned Trump. Do you think Trump gets back on Twitter today?
I think that's more than likely. I do think that, the COO, those people were fired, but they gained $44 million while he lost $44 billion.
Right. Yeah, no, it's definitely going to be really interesting, and I don't think we're going to have to wait very long to find out just how Musk leads that company, and more so whether or not he changes it. Anything else in the news that you want to bring up?
Just wanted to hop on the Herschel Walker
Mm-hmm.
debacle.
Mm-hmm.
Lindsey Graham speaking about how the Democrats were going to melt down if Herschel Walker was elected,
Mm-hmm.
and talking about how the GOP would no longer be viewed as racist. And when you call out a black man as a token, Lindsey Graham, hey, guess what? You're racist.
Yeah, that was kind of stunning watching that exchange. And it was actually one point where he leaned over and got weirdly awkward with Walker. And I think Jimmy Kimmel did a clip, and he was like, "Well, are they going to kiss? What was going on there?" It was kind of weird. I think even Herschel Walker was like, I am really...
You're too close, man. You're too close.
Yeah. I am many close. You am many close to me, Lindsay. That's probably what he would have said. A couple other things. The Fetterman debate. I don't want to spend too much time on that, but listen, people. In Pennsylvania, if you're listening, on his absolutely worst day, John Fetterman is 1 billion times more experienced, more capable, more qualified, more fit to serve than Dr. Oz, who is nothing but a fake-ass doctor, fake pill-selling, unqualified, inexperienced carpetbagger, as Maddie likes to point out, which he is. So let's do the right thing there, okay? Everybody's got illness in our families. We know people with strokes. Just imagine you have somebody in your family, your brother has a stroke, or you're like, all right, sit in a house by yourself and don't do anything. Quit your job because you're not qualified. Would you ever say that? Of course not. And if you saw John Fetterman sitting in a bar and you went up and talked to him, as we see from him doing interviews since the debate, he is a very coherent, articulate individual, and he's just recovering from a stroke, which is a temporary thing for him. And, Dr. Oz is just permanently a douchebag. So,
and also, John Fetterman would never serve tequila with a crudité, nor would he have raw asparagus. And
probably the most important reason not to vote for him, in my opinion. While we were sitting here today, for the most part, we learned two things: that our former guest on the pod, former Washington, D.C. Metropolitan Police Department officer Michael Fanone, who was almost killed in the January 6th insurrection. Well, the guy who basically dragged him out of that tunnel and started the movement to beat the living daylights out of him. He got 7 years in prison yesterday, so we're very happy about that. And then we just learned that Nancy Pelosi's husband was brutally attacked in their home in San Francisco. That story is actually developing, so we won't have many details on that. But it just speaks to where we're at in this country today with Trump and Trumpism and the violence that he and it incites, and the kind of society we've become. And this is yet another reason, folks, why on November 8th, you got to go into that polling place and keep Democrats in power, because violence, autocracy, corruption, treason. I mean, this is not what America is. It's not who we are, even though it kind of looks like we are. We can change that. Maddie, Jen, what's the one thing we can do to change all that and get everything we want?
Vote.
You get Roe v. Wade codified. You get everything we want. Climate change investment. Everything we want if we just vote. Instead of voting 55, 60%, what if we went out there and it was 75% turnout? Just imagine. It's not complicated, people. It's the one day of the year where the janitor and the billionaires have the exact same power. So I'm very excited about our guest today. He is Stuart Stevens. He's a senior advisor to the Lincoln Project. He is the author of 8 books, including the New York Times bestseller, It Was All a Lie: How the Republican Party Became Donald Trump in 2020. And his work has appeared in the New York Times, Washington Post, Esquire, and Outside magazine, among other publications. He's written extensively for television shows, including Northern Exposure, Commander-in-Chief, and K Street. For 25 years, he was the lead strategist and media consultant for some of the nation's toughest political campaigns, including Bush, Mitt Romney, etc. He attended Colorado College, Pembroke College, Oxford, Middlebury College, and UCLA Film School. He's a former fellow of the American Film Institute. He's a passionate never-Trumper, and he's fighting like hell to keep this guy out of office again and to help kill Trumpism. Stuart, welcome into the back room.
Thanks for asking me to the party, Andy. Appreciate it, man.
Well, before we get into the heavier stuff, we at the back room like to try to get a window into people's souls. So there's 2 things we ask them, one at the beginning of the pod and one towards the end. First one is, are you a dog or a cat person?
I actually have, in the last few years of my life, become more of a dog person.
So you started out life as a cat person,
Yes.
and now shifting to dog. What constitutes the change in?
I like running on trails with dogs.
Cats are not known for that.
No.
But I thought you were going to say because dogs are just more loyal, which would have been my answer. And I have 2 cats, but dogs are definitely a little more loyal, I think.
No, a million years ago, I lived in Switzerland and coached at the American school in Switzerland, and I smuggled the cat on board to fly to Switzerland, which was working great until I fell asleep on the plane and it came out of this bag I had and started going up and down the aisle of the plane. But it was very funny.
I'd say that kind of puts you in the cat when you start smuggling cats on an airplane.
I know
you're a cat guy.
Well, it was worse than that. I discovered like the day before I was supposed to leave that you had to have these like vaccination things, so they were supposed to be done months in advance. So I had to find a veterinarian. A friend of mine was married to a veterinarian, and I was able to bribe her. So that's what remember driving around thinking, just what my life has been reduced to. I'm trying to find a veterinarian I can bribe.
Well, this may sound like maybe it's an interesting question, but you know how people now bring dogs on planes, like therapy dogs?
Yeah.
Can you do that with a cat? Can you claim you have a therapy cat?
Sure you can. I've seen pictures of people having therapy pigs.
All right.
You could bring a cat.
Well, there's our segue note. We'll end on that. We'll end the animal portion of our podcast discussion on that.
All right.
In researching you a little bit, I found that you wrote for television, like Northern Exposure and stuff like that. I had no idea of that, and that kind of puts you in that Lawrence O'Donnell world.
Lawrence had a show that he created that I worked on. It ran for 1 season. It was about an appointed U.S. senator. Josh Brolin played the senator, and I worked for it. I've always been interested in three things: politics, film, and writing.
Mm-hmm.
And I've tried to pursue those three at various degrees of intensity at different points. But I was one of those people who did what is an absolutely insane thing to do. I did go to film school, I went to UCLA Film School and then AFI, which is a perfect example of the academization of something that should never be. It should just be a trade.
Mm-hmm. Parents, by the way, parents love when their kids go to film school. That always excites them.
But actually, the way I fell into doing, I was interested in politics, but the way I fell into doing commercials is I had been a page in Washington for a congressman, and the guy who was his chief of staff, the congressman was then running for the Senate, and the guy who had been his chief of staff, who'd been my boss effectively, was running for his House seat, and he was running against an incumbent senator's son. And no one thought he had a chance. And he called me up and said, like, you have to make commercials for me. You're going to film school. And I said, like, that's great, but I don't know how to make commercials. I just make these stupid little films. But I ended up making commercials for him, and he ended up winning, which had nothing to do with my commercials, just the right time, the right place. And then I discovered people would like pay me money to make political ads for them. Mm-hmm. And I could do it kind of like migrant labor work when working campaigns. Nobody would pay me to write. And then eventually I got to where people would pay me to write, but I had gotten into kind of being a political gunslinger. And I kept doing both. And I fell into television writing because a guy who, a friend of a friend, who one of the two people who created this show called Northern Exposure, he wanted to make a film out of a book I wrote about traveling through Africa called Malaria Dreams. And he, called me up and said, look, I don't have a film deal, but we have this TV deal and we're doing this little summer replacement show, 8 episodes. And why don't you come out here and we can pay you to write that and we can work on the script on the side. I said, like, that's great, Josh, but I don't know how to write TV. He says, don't worry, I'll teach you. So I did. I wrote the first episode of Northern Exposure. No one remotely thought it would be a success, or they wouldn't have let me anywhere near it. So I did off and on in my life. I've done a fair amount of TV writing.
Mm-hmm. And, TV has become incredible in the last few years with the quality of the content and the artists who are engaged in it. Before we shift to politics, I'm just curious, like, what do you watch? What are the shows that you think are the best out there right now?
Oh, I love Fauda, mm-hmm. which is an Israeli show.
Yep, I love it.
I think it's the best. I've worked a lot in Israel. Mm-hmm. I love Israel. I find it fascinating. And I think Fauda is tremendous. And, those same core group of people did a series called Tehran, which is shockingly good, about a Mossad agent, mm-hmm. undercover female Mossad agent in Tehran. And I like a lot of Nordic stuff, like Borderlands, mm-hmm. Because of my sort of obsession with winter sports. I have spent a lot of time in Scandinavia, particularly Sweden, so I kind of have this fascination with it. But I don't watch that much. Mm-hmm. I don't have the metabolic rate to watch television, really. I have to be doing something else, like mm-hmm. Riding a bike or something, or on a plane. I watch them on a plane.
I just finished The Peaky Blinders, and if you haven't seen that show,
I watched several seasons of that.
Best show I've ever seen. Yeah,
I thought it was brilliant.
So, I want to ask you, what's you're part of the Lincoln Project. You have been for a couple of years now, and obviously right. You're very, anti-Trump, anti-Trumpster. You're definitely in that group. We've had Rick Wilson, you're an associate on the pod. We've had Stephanie Grisham.
Condolences.
Yeah, we've. I personally am incredibly appreciative and grateful and thankful for people who were on the other side, the darker side, as I think you've referenced in the past. Have you had a shift in party affiliation? I mean, are you still considering yourself?
I don't consider myself a Republican anymore.
Mm-hmm.
I'm basically, I would fall in that category of what we would call in politics, pretty much a functional Democrat.
Right.
I live in Vermont now,
mm-hmm.
and there's this little group of Republican governors: Phil Scott here in Vermont, mm-hmm. Charlie Baker in Massachusetts, Larry Hogan in Maryland. I worked for all these guys, and I love those guys. They're fantastic. And if the Republican Party had any sense, they would look at them and say, these guys are selling our product in the toughest markets. What can we learn from them? But they just kind of treat them with benign neglect at best. So, in Vermont, I'm getting ready to vote. You have to run every 2 years when you're governor here. So I'll vote for Phil Scott. And I like this woman who's running for Congress here, the Democrat, Becca Balin. I'll vote for her. I would have voted for Liz Cheney, but I worked a lot with Liz. Mm-hmm. I like Liz a lot.
And what do you think of what happened overnight with the news that she is not only endorsing, but going to be campaigning with Alyssa Slotkin?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think it's completely consistent. I hope so. I think it's completely consistent with her, putting country first. I worked really closely with Liz, and I never knew any of the Cheneys until the summer of 2000 when Bush picked him to be his vice president. And I was doing debate prep for Bush, and I got thrown into doing debate prep for Cheney. And he did an interesting thing in that campaign. He had, his two daughters, and they had jobs in the campaign. They weren't just hangers on. Mary worked in advance, and Liz ran debate prep. Mm-hmm. It was actually the Cheney vice presidential campaign operation was, I think, the first all-female led national campaign that made it all the way to November. The campaign manager was a woman. Everybody kind of running that Cheney world was a woman, which makes sense because Cheney lives in this kind of matriarchy, with his wife and two daughters. Mm-hmm. But Liz was incredibly impressive doing that. She had there's a lot of people around Cheney who thought a lot of themselves, not surprisingly, and she had a really deft touch at how to deal with them. And so I wrote a book about the Bush campaign, the 2000 campaign called The Big Enchilada. And I predicted in that Liz would run for president. And I was sort of joking, but not really. I mean, she was that impressive. So she's the idea that now a Cheney has been drummed out of the party, it's just mind-boggling.
It is mind-boggling. And the interesting thing to me is, like when you said before, if the Republican Party was smart, they'd listen more to the Larry Hogans. And,
right.
There is such a seismic shift from where the party has moved to. Relatively speaking, it has gone from the Partridge family to the Manson family. That's where they're at today. Yet, at the same time, you also see seismic shifts in someone like Liz Cheney endorsing and campaigning with a Democrat, that's mind-boggling as well.
There really isn't an anti-Trump movement of any size in the Republican Party.
Do you think that's going to change? I mean, right now, yes, you're 100% right. But you don't think a year from now, 2 years from now?
No. What's difficult, I think, for me to grasp, I think maybe for others, is the Republican Party was not hijacked by Trump. The Republican Party is what it wants to be. There's no one that makes anybody vote for Trump. No one makes anybody vote for these wackadoo candidates. Mm-hmm. I think it's all about race. Mm-hmm. In a country that's becoming a majority country, 85% of Trump's coalition in 20 was white. The country is 57 to 60% white, depending on exactly how you look at it. And, since we've been talking, it's less white. And the Republican Party had kind of two choices: either do the hard work necessary to appeal to more non-white voters, particularly African Americans, or become a white grievance party. And they made the tragic decision to become a white grievance party.
But is it working? Has it worked? Has that strategy worked so far? It doesn't seem to have been.
Well, I think a couple of things. One, it is a strategy with a short window because of the demographic changes. 1980, 63% of the voting public was non-college educated white. That's now down to 39, 40%. I mean, here's a perfect number. So Ronald Reagan, 1980, wins this sweeping landslide, right? He got 58% of the white vote. John McCain in 2008 lost a race, not particularly close, with 58% of the white vote. So the party understands this, which is why they're so desperate to change the rules of voting. Because if you make it legal for the Georgia state legislature to overturn the popular vote, when the Georgia state legislature overturns the popular vote, it won't be illegal. And, you know, I think there's a great mistake to look at. There's a lot of buffoonish people over there in that side, you know, the Lauren Boeparts, the Marjorie, whatever her name is, Matt Gaetz, but it's not a buffoonish movement. I mean, if you look historically, all the elements for an autocratic movement to succeed are with the Republican Party. It has the backing of a major party. It has unlimited financing from people like Peter Thiel. It has a propaganda wing, a vast propaganda wing, you know, Fox and all those other Ben Shapiro, all these crazies, Bannon. It has shock troops, as we saw on January 6th. And it has a dedicated, focused legal arm dedicated to erecting a legal structure to base this move from democracy to autocracy on. And, you know, I know a lot of these people. I mean, they think they're going to win. And that's why they're obsessed with Hungary, because they see Hungary as being a perfect example of how it won, how they went from democracy to autocracy. And honestly, it's hard to argue. I mean, you can't just dismiss it out of hand and say, no, they're not going to win. Which is why I'm working with the Lincoln Project. I never thought at this point in my life I'd be making television ads. Mm-hmm. But, you know, I don't know what else to do except to fight. I mean, I think a lot of fights you get in not because you think you're going to win, you get in because it's important to fight.
Well, of the Lincoln Project, James Carville has said, quote, "Let me tell you, the Lincoln Group, these never Trumper Republicans, the Democrats could learn a lot from them. They're mean, they fight hard, and we don't fight like that." Why don't Democrats fight like that? What is it that stops a Democrat from doing? I mean, the Lincoln Project came along, and I remember watching it and going, finally, it takes Republicans to make the kind of ads for Democrats that I've been waiting for my whole life. Why is that? It seems so easy and obvious a goal.
Well, I think it's complicated. You know, people talk about how Republicans are better at messaging a lot, but it's really not a fair comparison because, you know, the audience that Republicans are messaging to is so much more homogeneous. I mean, think about putting on a concert, right? If you're putting on a concert for Republicans, it's pretty easy. Like, you know, if you're putting on a concert for the Democratic Party, you're going to need all these different kinds of music. You know, you're going to need like, you know, classical or rap, jazz, whatever. And that ultimately is a strength.
So you're saying it's a lot easier when you just put Kid Rock on the stage?
Yeah.
All right.
100%.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
Makes sense.
As someone who has put Kid Rock on the stage. And that ultimately is a strength. I think to a certain degree, this is over. I think it's truth. I mean, there are certain things we know how to do, I think, better than a lot of Democrats. And we try to use those skills now. But let's don't forget, Republicans have only won the popular vote once since 1988, and that was 2004. And I did that campaign. Mm-hmm. And, you know, say what you will about Bush world, we never thought that we had anything figured out. We always thought we were very lucky, that it could have gone. We were, I think, pretty humble about it. Mm-hmm. Because we realized, you know, if less than a stadium full of Ohio State home game changed votes in Ohio, Kerry would have won. So, you know, the Democrats, you say, well, the Republicans are really much better at this. And you go, yeah, I don't know. The Republicans, you know, I mean, the Democrats have the White House, and Senate. How bad can they be? So I think.
Well, is that because of the skill of Democrats, or just is it because voters decided what they think is important? Is it despite? I guess my point is, do we have the House, the Senate? Did we flip Georgia? Did we flip Arizona in spite of Democrats?
No, I think the Biden campaign ran a brilliant campaign. I don't think they get enough credit for it. Mm-hmm. They never took the bait with Trump, and just stuff like the convention they put on. I mean, I've done a lot of these conventions. It is incredibly hard to have 3 or 4 good nights. You can have a couple, but they had to reinvent the whole convention model. Stephanie Cutter led that. I thought it was just stark raving brilliant. It's incredibly difficult to do what they do. I, when the Lincoln Project started, and I wasn't involved with it when it was started, so I can say this without any false modesty, but they took the position that at the time, a lot of Democrats were saying, which made sense, Elizabeth Warren kind of encapsulated this, that the 20 race should not be about Trump. That everybody in America has a fixed opinion on Trump. There's nothing you can say about Trump that's going to change anybody's mind. You have to make it about issues, which is what they did in 2018 to some success. Lincoln Party came along and said, no, Trump is the number 1 issue, the number 2 issue, the first 50 issues. And I think they said that when Biden was busy losing primaries. And then when Biden won, I think he came out with a pretty similar message, the soul of America, which I think has a lot to do with why these down ticket races for Republicans did better. I mean, the ultimate test for any national presidential campaign is can you control what the race is about? So Biden made it a referendum on decency, really, the soul of the nation. So you could look at somebody like Olympia Snowe and go, is she a decent person? So, yeah, she's a decent person. Larry Tillis, or Tom Tillis, he's probably a decent person, if that's the metric. I think the races in Georgia, I grew up in Mississippi. People don't kind of grasp because, don't think about it. The reason runoffs were invented in the South is to stop blacks from winning statewide. The idea being you could have, say, 1 black running and 4, white people running. The black candidate might get 42%, 44%, but then you get in the runoff and all the white people would vote for the white person and they lose. And it worked pretty much with 100% success. So it's incredibly difficult. And I've worked a lot in Georgia. Johnny Isaacson, the senator who passed away, which is why they were having one of these elections, was a client of mine. I don't think people appreciate the extraordinary success of both of those campaigns. To win 2 Georgia Senate races like that, it's like winning the World Series pitching 4 perfect games. It's just stunning. Trump had a lot to do with it, discouraging people to vote. Sure. But, politics is always about taking advantage of your opponent's mistakes. So, look, if I ran the Democratic Party right now, may God help us, but there's only 3 times in the last 125 years that a party in power has gained seats in the off year. The last time was 2002. And I was very involved in that campaign in Bush world. And we nationalized the race as much as we could around domestic security, after 9/11. And I can remember vividly, being asked to, like in December of 21, is this going to work? And our answer was, we don't know, but we think it's the best shot. And it was something that Bush really believed in. I would try to nationalize this race around democracy. And people say, well, democracy doesn't show up number 1 in the polls a lot, I don't remember anybody pointing to a poll in 2007 that said hope and change is the number 1 issue in America. Campaigns are about the issues that you can try to make them about. And I think campaigns have to, if a campaign doesn't invest in a message, you don't have the standing to ask voters to invest in that message. So every time Biden goes out and talks about democracy like this, I cheer and, run around the house yelling. Because I think that's what the race is about. I think if it's a race about inflation, that's not a race Democrats can do particularly well in. Though certainly Republicans have no message on inflation or gas prices. I think you have to try to make a race. It's like a pro football or college football matchup. You've got to put strength on weakness. And I would be about the business of putting Trump on the ballot. So if the race were held today for president, you have to bet that Biden would beat Trump by more than he did. And there's a reason that Republicans don't want Trump out there for the most part. I would put Trump on the ballot and make it a referendum on Trump and democracy, and not a referendum on Biden.
Right. And back to Carville for a second. He famously said, it's the economy's stupid. I was watching MSNBC this morning, and Jen Psaki, the former Biden press secretary, as you know, she's part of MSNBC now, and they went out on a Get Out the Vote campaign in a neighborhood, I forget where, and they knocked on a door, and it was an African-American woman, and the kids are behind her. And the gist of it was, I'm trying to find the money for our next meal. And I'm with you on the democracy thing. I really am. Because to me, there's nothing more important than that. Not abortion, not inflation, nothing. If our democracy dies, none of that shit matters. But then I say, okay, Andy, get out of your elitist, liberal, politically minded head and think about what that woman is saying. Is she worried about democracy? Is it a concept that's just too...
I think it depends on how you phrase it. If you say they're going to make it harder for you and your children to vote because you're African American and you're at the lower economic scale, I think they care about that.
Okay, well, that's critical. What you just said is what I wanted to get to, which was, okay, let's put aside Democrats. Can they fight as good as Republicans? Blah, blah, blah. Let's put that aside. Listening to you for the last few minutes, Democrats, when it comes to messaging, are awful. You went through a litany before of why Biden's campaign was great. I could go through a litany of why his first 2 years has been amazing. I'm not John Meacham, but I think he's been historically speaking, given what he's up against, he is one of the most effective presidents at least in modern history. Why is that party with that administration running neck and neck with a party that's done absolutely nothing but support a corrupt, pathologically lying sociopath traitor? Explain that to me.
I think you have to ask, why does Vegas win? You have to respect the fact that, again, only 3 times the last 125 years has a party in power gained seats. And, you can't look at that and go, well, it's a coincidence. Just they had bad messaging here. They had, the most powerful word in advertising is new. Nobody ever tries to sell a car by saying, look, just as good as it was last year. We haven't done anything. We haven't screwed this up at all. Right. And I think it is a very American inbred, that's the word, sort of instinct to believe that things can be better. So change. I mean, I've always, I love James. I think he's brilliant. I work with him very closely on the show called K Street. And of course, I love Mary forever, Mary Matlin. But I would argue that race wasn't about the economy. I think it was about change. And once that race became about change, which it didn't, it's the one race that George Bush couldn't win because he could never be an element of the guy who'd run the CIA, been in Congress, been a Republican national chairman, vice president for 8 years. He could not win a race about change. But it didn't have to be about change. It could have been about national security. It could have been about a lot of things. But once, Clinton was running third in May. But then when Perot got out and the race became about change, he took a lead after the Democratic Convention in August and never gave it up. So change is a very powerful desire. It's an element. So I think it is difficult for a party that controls the three levels of government to argue that they are going to be a greater element of change than the people running against them. Now, I think you can. I just think it's difficult. If you look at a lot of what Republicans are saying, I saw this tweet that the RNC, which is so, hapless, put out talking about how unemployment was down of the top states, like half of them or more than half that unemployment was down had Republican governors. So if you really think about what are they arguing there? They're arguing that unemployment is going down. So it's sort of like, times are great, vote for change.
Right.
Now you can do this. If you look at the Bush campaign in 2000, this is something we struggle with constantly. On election day in 2000, consumer confidence was at the highest level it had ever been on election day since they started tracking consumer confidence. It's a race that Biden should have won easily. And the only message that we had that really worked was restoring honor and dignity to the White House. And that is a race that they should have won. So you can, but did it have to be about that? No, it didn't have to be about that. And obviously it was a very close race. So look, I think, it's kind of like, you say, okay, Black Lives Matter. You're not saying that white lives don't matter. It's like in the Bible when they say, blessed are the poor. You're not saying, the other people aren't blessed. So I think that when you say the race is about democracy, it doesn't mean you can't talk about these other things.
We could talk about other things,
but we're able to hold these, completely contradictory ideas in our heads. We all do, I mean, on every given subject we do. It's that balance between, sometimes during the day you feel optimistic, sometimes you feel down. So, we're very complicated. So I think ultimately all races come down to what is the question that's being asked and how can your candidate be the only answer? And I look at campaigns like arguments in front of a jury. And in the ideal campaign, I think, you could run your first spot as your last spot. It's like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is what this is about. Mm-hmm. And in this campaign, I'm going to prove this. And then at the end, it's like, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, this is what this race is about. This is what we've proved. And I think that there is an extraordinary situation here that the majority of Republicans do not believe that they live in a democracy now. They believe that Joe Biden was not a legally elected president, which means you don't live in a democracy. We've never had that. I mean, think about what Biden is doing now. They're going on the Hill to try to work with Republicans, right? Most of those Republicans have constituents that don't believe he's a legal president. So it's like, what are you doing here? You're not legal. In the 24 election, it's unimaginable. I think Trump's going to win the primary, but no one will win the primary if it's not Trump, who will assert that Joe Biden is a legally elected president. I mean, DeSantis doesn't say that. He says he accepts Biden. Well, I accept Putin. So you're going to have the first race against not two parties that have different political views, but one party trying to defeat an illegal president who's an occupant. Mm-hmm. So I think that the scope of that and what this means, and I think the ramifications of what the party wants to do now. I think that when you're putting bounties on women seeking medical care in Texas, that's part of democracies because democracies don't do that. That is what a totalitarian state does. That's what the Stasi would do. You turn in your neighbor. You report your neighbor. So I think that's part of democracy. I think when you have the power of the government punishing political opponents in the business sector, which is what Republicans are now saying they intend to do, mm-hmm. That's not democracy.
Well, DeSantis has already done it with Disney.
DeSantis has done it. Guy picked a fight with the happiness company. So you have to explain what this means. So it is ultimately, what is the essence of the American experiment? The essence of the American experiment is empowering you to decide your own fate. What government are you going to have? Mm-hmm. And what is happening with Republicans is they're trying to take that away. They are, they know that they're in the minority. So they are attempting through a bunch of different ways to have a country in which which will have minority rule, which ultimately, is the essence of the Electoral College, which I've now become a complete, opponent of. But that's what democracy is. So, I look at these CEOs, and we just made an ad in the Lincoln Project about companies that are still giving money to the Republican Governors Association, which is supporting like Mastriano and Lake. Mm-hmm. And it's like, man, he or she, you're CEO of a company here. You want to be here or you want to be in Putin? You want to be in Russia? You want to be a CEO here or you want to be a CEO in Hungary, where you have to be a friend of Orban's to do anything? And I think it's incredibly short-sighted of these companies not to realize. But, there's a lot of serious work that has been done studying how democracies become autocracies. And one of the consistent elements is the inability to imagine it happening. Mm-hmm. And it doesn't happen in coups usually. Like, it's not like Allende in Chile. It usually happens at the ballot box and in the courtroom. Mm-hmm. So part of the problem about this, Andy, is how to talk about it because you sound alarmist. It's like a pandemic. Whatever you say at the beginning sounds alarmist, but in the end, they'll probably prove to be inadequate.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a struggle. I think part of the American exceptionalism is thinking that it will always be this way in America. But there's no reason for that to be true. And I firmly believe if Trump wins the next election, it'll be the last election we can recognize in America.
You talked before about Georgia and the odds of that election going the way it did a couple of years ago. Conventional wisdom definitely dictates that the Democrats will lose the House, right? Yeah. Not a matter of if, but by how much. Yep. But my thing is, if you look at the last 6 or 7 years, every single thing that's happened in politics has utterly defied conventional wisdom.
Listen, you're so right. In 2016, there are a lot of people wrong about Trump, but it's really hard to find anybody who was more wrong than me. And I sort of infamously said, for Donald Trump to win, everything we know about politics has to be wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Well, it turns out that's what it was.
Yep.
So I agree completely. And we've never had a case in our lifetimes of a Supreme Court decision affecting voters the way that the repeal of Roe did. And that is an incalculable thing. And one of the problems, when you look at all this, polling is nothing but modeling, as you know. So how do you model this? One of the reasons the polling was so off in 2016 is there was an assumption that there was a maximum number of white voters you could get. And, like in the Romney campaign, you could sit there and look at polls and you could say, there's certain voters out there who are low propensity white voters who, if you went a certain direction in immigration and went a certain direction playing the race card, they would be motivated to vote. Which, Romney would never even consider this. But I would have said, as just sort of like a political practitioner, that if you did that, the votes that you would lose on the other end, mm-hmm. sort of college-educated Republicans, would not compensate for the votes that you got. And that proved to be wrong in 16. Though, we forget, Trump won with 46.2%, I think, of the vote. Romney lost with 47.1.
Mm-hmm.
So, at a base level, a very simple level, why did Trump win? He won because he ran in a year in which you could win with 46.2%. Had Romney run in that year, he would have won easily.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's very difficult to model, I can make a case that a lot of these races are going to turn out to be more Democratic than the polls are indicating.
Mm-hmm.
But, what I always used to say in campaigns is if we're going to ask a polling question, if it's 10 points this way or 10 points that way, are we going to do anything differently? And if the answer is no, then why the hell are we asking?
Right.
It doesn't, this is only to direct us. It's not like we're not writing a PhD thesis. Mm-hmm. This is just about, so I don't know if you believe that, what you would do differently. Usually politics is a game of small numbers.
Mm-hmm.
So, each of these races is is probably going to be very close. And a lot of what's happening, you see people, like last week, there's all this stuff about how Republicans are, gaining and stuff.
Mm-hmm. A
lot of that is just noise because at the end of the day, no one is going to win a race in Georgia by 6 points.
Mm-hmm.
So
what is, as we wrap up here, what do you think is going to happen in 11 days? Is it conventional wisdom that prevails, or are we going to see something that's shockingly unique and Democrats keep the House?
I have the humility to say I don't know. And I really don't know how you could say you do know. Because I really don't know. I think that we're in a unique moment. There are data points that indicate the increased number of registration among women. If you look at some of the early voting data, that this is going to be better. But for Democrats, I think you could point to other things, I think there's some weak Democratic candidates out there. So I honestly don't know. I when I used to, pitch candidates to hire me, I used to, maybe that's a year or two out, right? And they'd say, well, how am I going to win? And my standard answer was, I have no idea. I mean, how could you know? Which used to kind of freak,
Well, it's like when they interview like a basketball player before the game. Like, what do you got to do to win tonight? And it's like, I got to take that big orange thing and put it in the medal.
Yeah,
thing.
I put it in the pen. I mean, my standard answer was, I don't know how to win, but I know how to find out how to win.
Right.
And I think that if you really do this campaigns, and there's not a lot of us. I mean, most people do campaigns and they grow up and they go on and do other stuff, right? There's a weird little freakish subset of us that are drawn to campaigns over and over and over. It is humbling, and it's like being an NFL player, on any given Sunday, and you have to recognize that. And I think that any idea that you've figured things out is completely delusional.
Right.
So I don't.
All right.
Don't know.
You're taking the perhaps smart, safer route because it is a crapshoot. The last thing that we do here with the window into the soul is to find out about music. Music is a real window into someone's soul. So we ask, who's your top 5 artists of all time?
Oh God. Listen, I'll take a pass on that. But I find that I don't listen to as much music as I used to, and I ask myself why. And I think it's interesting. Why is it that I think it's true of a lot of people, most people probably, why is it that when we're like 21, music is more important to us than as we get older? And it's an interesting question. I don't know the answer to that.
Well, there might be a parallel between the fact that musicians also are more profound when they're younger, because
true.
You look at music and how it's written about relationships and struggles and work, and all of a sudden someone's making $1 bazillion a year and on a big house and a mansion in the sky, and they lose their inspiration for what drove them, and that sort of correlates, I think, to the importance of music in young people.
I just wrote a novel that is set in the civil rights era in Mississippi and Memphis. It's set in the first 3 months of 1968, and I listened. The music scene in Memphis in the at that period, 1968, was an extraordinary scene. You had just this amazing confluence of talent there, white and black. White, you had a guy like Alex Chilton, who was 17, was in the Box Tops, then later went on to do Dark Star. You had Larry Raspberry and the High Steppers, and then these incredible blues musicians that came up. And I spent a lot of time listening to that music when I was writing this novel. And there was also a height of the Tet Offensive. We had Jefferson Airplane and The Doors. And I found that listening to the music of that era really helped me write and sort of get in that mindset.
Well, it sounds like you gave us a little window into your soul without giving us a window. You actually let it be known that Stuart Stevens was the first guest on the pod who took the 5th on the music question. So we'll end on that note. Stuart, you've been great.
As I used to say to my candidates, they can ask the question, but you don't have to answer.
There you go. You just explained politics in 5 seconds.
Really.
Thanks for coming on. You've been great.
All
I hope
right,
you'll come back.
Great talking with you.
Yep. Take care. Bye-bye.
Take care, man.
Before we wrap up, we're going to bring back Congressman Pat Ryan for just a couple of minutes update on where the campaign is, his thoughts on the midterms. How's the campaign going?
Things are going well. We are in the final stretch. Certainly, I'm literally in the car between as many events and meetings and talking to voters as I can. We have really good momentum from our victory in August, and we're just working to continue that fight. Right now, we're leading in the polling, although I don't really trust polling very much at this point.
Mm-hmm.
And I feel like the energy on the ground is very good.
What would you say in this 11th hour that is the bright spots, and what do you think remains a challenge for you as you head towards the 8th?
Well, I mean, I think to me the bright spots are just, again, reflecting on what we were able to do in our special election, where all the polls and pundits thought we were not going to win that race, and the people of our community of the Hudson Valley stood up when the national spotlight was on us and said, we're going to fight for choice. We're going to fight for freedom. We're going to fight for democracy. We're going to fight for safety, and sent a really resounding message. So when we're faced with that again, I think people are going to rise to the challenge even more this time. And I'm definitely feeling that energy. I think, the challenge is we're certainly still having a lot of conversations with folks who are feeling a lot of economic pain and pressure and just overall distrust with government, frankly.
Mm-hmm.
And we have a lot of work to do to rebuild that trust. And that's the only way we do that is actually deliver results and help people. So that's what we're just trying to continue to focus on and work on.
Mm-hmm. You had an event recently in Poughkeepsie. Biden came. You're kind of, I won't say you're in a small group, but you're definitely in a group of people who are embracing Biden and the success of Biden's administration and his presidency. Why do you think more Democrats running are not doing that, given where the accomplishment level has been these last 2 years?
Yeah, I don't understand why we wouldn't be tremendously proud and be shouting from the rooftop the work we've done, the results we've delivered. There's still a lot to do. I mean, we haven't certainly accomplished everything, but to have the President of the United States come to the Hudson Valley, deliver a $20 billion commitment from one of the world's leading companies in IBM to reinvest in this region, and that's a huge deal. I literally said it was a BFD.
Right.
The president got a chuckle at that. But it is. And so I think there's two things we have to do. Of course, one is continue to recognize and help people understand we are all experiencing this pain at grocery stores, gas pumps, healthcare costs, housing costs, but we're actually delivering to help address that immediate relief and medium and long-term results in terms of rebuilding the economy here. So I just think at the end of the day, there's sort of like two ways you can think about a campaign and talking about things. There's a whole lot of, it's either rhetoric or results, really, is what I'm trying to say. And I just feel like people are tuned out from, and should be, the rhetoric, and they just want to see results. So that's really what we're continuing to talk about, remind people about.
Mm-hmm. So as we do this podcast literally from the 18th district in New York, what do you say? What's your closing argument, your elevator pitch closing argument to our listeners who happen to be residing in the 18th district? What's the pitch for the 8th from Pat Ryan?
Well, the high level pitch is please, you got to come out and vote. I hope it's for me. But really, our democracy is hanging by a thread. We need everybody to be engaged, to participate, to understand the threat. When fundamental rights are being ripped away from tens of millions of people, basically half the country plus, we have to stand up as Americans. I mean, that's just a red line. When literally our democracy is at risk, we need to stand up and answer that with resounding results. So that fighting for rights plus delivering real tangible relief, those are the twin imperatives, I think, of the moment we're in. And that's really what our campaign is about and what I've been trying to work on as your member of Congress for the last few months, which has been a tremendous honor. So, I think that, again, looking back on what we saw in August, I'm optimistic that we're going to deliver again here in the Hudson Valley. And the path to holding the Congress and the House specifically literally runs through, Rhinebeck, Kingston, Beacon, Poughkeepsie, Newburgh. And so please step up for our democracy.
Congressman Patrick Ryan, we wish you a lot of success on the 8th. Thank you for coming back and giving us a quick update. And we'll be rooting for you on a couple of Tuesdays from now. Take care.
Thank you for having me. Have a great day.
Take care. Bye-bye. So there you have it, episode 22 in the can. We'd love to hear your thoughts, so leave us a message at 845-307-7446. Email us at backroomandy@gmail.com or tweet to me at Andy Ostroy. And if you like the pod, please leave a review. Those things are kind of important. I want to thank my co-producer, engineer, and editor, Maddie Rosenberg, associate producer, Jen Hamoud, Cricket Langale for our artwork, Andy Hollander for our kick-ass music, Patricia Wind, and the Epicurean for the Backroom Studio. And a big thank you again to our guest, the Lincoln Project's Stuart Stevens, and Congressman Pat Ryan. So keep your eyes on Washington, Hollywood, and your own backyards, and we hope you'll join us again next time. Have a great week.